Hello, everybody. Welcome today. We're so glad to have you with us here today. Welcome to Tech Beat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. I'm so happy to have Glen Horsley, CEO of RIVN, with me today. I'm going to come back around and do an official intro for Glen. But first of all, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this live stream podcast, and we encourage you, throughout the hour here, to go ahead and post your questions in whatever social media platform you're joining us from. We'll see those here on our screen. If they're relevant to the topic of the discussion as we go, we'll get to those throughout my conversation with Glen. If not, we will come back around to those at the end of our conversation. My name is Earl Foote. I am founder, CEO of Nexus IT. We are a white-gloved outsourced IT support, cybersecurity, compliance, and cloud firm based here in Northern Utah. We service Northern Utah and beyond. Quickly, I want to let everybody know that we've got some really great sessions coming up. I'm trying to do 2 of these Tech Beat sessions every month that revolve around entrepreneurship, leadership, and the tech industry and tech scene. So in the next month here, actually about 2 months, I've got 4 really great guests coming up. First of all, on March 24th at 12 p.m., Adam Sessions, CEO of OneWire, will be joining me. He and I are going to talk a little bit about modern collaboration tools, particularly in today's work from home environments, and how those can help our teams. And then April 6th at 12 p.m., I've got Tanner Bell, CEO of Ragnar, obviously a really cool global brand that most of us are quite familiar with. Tanner is based here in Salt Lake City, and he's a really great guy and has a cool entrepreneurial story. So we're going to talk about that, about his story from having an idea in college and what has become this massive global brand now. April 20th at 12 p.m., Dell Majors, CEO of Grand Trunk, if you're familiar with the hammock and outdoor brand, which I am. I own many of their hammocks. Dell's going to join me, and we're going to talk a little bit about his entrepreneurial journey and his brands as well. Also fascinating stories going from nothing, literally building or buying bike parts at swap meets and stuff like that and selling them on eBay, to actually exiting a very successful e-commerce company, and then now buying other e-commerce brands. And then May 5th, Greg Woodall, CEO of BS Software, is going to join me. We're going to talk a bit about his entrepreneurial journey, also very fascinating, kind of similar to Glen's story a bit, in that he started in sales and ultimately became a founder and CEO of a SaaS platform. So let me go ahead and do our official intro of Glen. And Glen, so happy to have you with us today. By the way, actually, so Glen and I, both of us, and our companies produce a lot of really helpful, valuable content on social media and on our blog. So we would invite you to connect with us on LinkedIn and our company pages, and stay abreast of all of the news and the things that we share in regard to compliance, privacy, cybersecurity, and the like. So Glen is co-founder and CEO of RIVN, a hot new privacy startup based in Lehi, Utah. Glen found his passion for data privacy during his 12+ years working at companies such as Adobe, Qualtrics, and Telium. When Glen isn't focused on saving the world through privacy compliance, you can find him with his wife and 3 kids. Glen has played sports since he was young and now enjoys watching his 2 daughters play competitive volleyball and his only son play football and baseball. On a snowy day, you will usually find Glen on the mountain skiing, which is his way of staying grounded in these crazy times. Not a lot of snow the last week, Glen. It's been pretty, a lot of sunshine. So, Glen, I know you have a fascinating, entrepreneurial story yourself, having come from a background of technical sales or SaaS-related sales, and ultimately having an idea and becoming a co-founder and CEO of RIVN. Tell us a little bit about that story and the evolution there.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do, Earl, I just wanted to thank you so much for having me on. This is a fun opportunity to get out there and to talk about data privacy, which has really become a passion of mine. So thank you so much for giving this opportunity to kind of share some of the things that are really important in this new landscape that we as entrepreneurs and business owners and business people are dealing with. So thanks for that. So as Earl mentioned, Glen Horsley, I've been really in the digital marketing world for so long, and on the sales and marketing side of the business. And that's really where my passion was. I've been in part of sales organizations, really well-known, prominent companies that have done very well for themselves, like Omniture, who sold to Adobe, was part of Qualtrics for a nice little stint there, and they've done some really nice things. And I've had a chance to learn from some great business leaders and kind of see what they're doing. And over the last probably 3-4 years, prior to co-founding RIVN, was part of a company called Telium, and Telium had a really interesting take on how customers could use data. So there's this new concept called customer data platforms, and it's really all about getting data, ingesting data, and using that data to improve personalization and make your marketing messaging and experience better for your customers. Well, through that process, Europe has launched their new privacy law called GDPR, and we had to really look at that deeply as a company to say, how do we help our companies with their compliance efforts? And so while I was at Telium, that became a very common conversation that we talked about. And then with new local state laws here in the United States coming into act, we even became more aware of it. So part of that, one of the companies that I worked really closely with back when I was at Telium was a company here based in Salt Lake City called Ancestry.com, which I think a lot of people are very familiar with. And Ancestry was looking for a way to optimize their compliance efforts, and they were curious if Telium was in a position to help with that. And through that process, I realized that there was a lot of compliance needs within the landscape that companies were going to need to start to figure out how to automate. And there really wasn't a lot of good technologies out in the space at the time. And so got together with my other co-founders and said, hey, is this something we can build and something that we can go to market with? And so back in late 2018, we founded and launched RIVN. And so it's been quite the journey. It's been an amazing experience, and have really become more of a privacy expert than anything, and kind of surprised me because it's not a topic I thought I would really fall in love with the way that I have. So, but that's ultimately my journey to getting RIVN to where it is here in 2021, and it's been pretty good experience.
Super cool. Very, very cool. So I have another question about that, but first of all, just this space of compliance and data security and privacy has become a significant challenge for the majority of businesses to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, even just figure out how to understand it all, because there's so much complexity involved.
Mm-hmm.
And then figuring out how to actually institute, good ongoing privacy and compliance and cybersecurity programs or practices within their organization, which, unfortunately are not set it and forget it type of things. It's something that you consistently have to assess and adapt and change and evolve. And obviously these regulations are constantly evolving. With new regulations coming on board all the time at federal, at state levels, and at international levels as well. We're going to come back around and talk a little bit about GDPR. So wait a second, this is a European Privacy Act, and why are companies in Utah or in North America even remotely concerned about it, right? and I want to come back and talk about that. But so here you are, 2018, you start this business, and maybe 18 to 24 months later, along comes COVID, right? Tell us a little bit about how how the business has fared over the past year, and what impacts COVID has had on your business.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were really 2019 for us was product development and product testing. So we had just hit our stride going into the end of 2019 as a company. We had onboarded our very first customer. We were super excited. We had proved that what we were doing as a company was working. January, we had hired a bunch of new employees. We'd raised a little bit of money, so we'd hired some employees, and we were really focused on growing and competing in the space. Well, March hits, and all of a sudden, this mass panic happens in the market. Companies weren't sure where they were going to be, and so they had to put a little bit of a pause button on their buying and what was important, and so that it caused RIVN to really pivot and evaluate what our goal was as a company and what our future looked like. And we had to make some changes to survive 2020, I think, like most companies. But the biggest thing that we did is we realized, hey, we can't be an enterprise solution because not all companies are ready and prepared to have a really complex, heavy implementation. They're just not going to have the resources following COVID. So the biggest thing that we did is we said, hey, let's make it as easy as possible. Let's almost make this a self-serve solution that somebody can implement and have live here within a matter of days, if not quicker. And that was the biggest change we made. Was we recognized resources were limited within companies. We recognized that buying power was limited within companies, but privacy wasn't going away, and they needed solutions. And so we had to stop and evaluate our technology and say, let's make this easier and quicker so that it's not as demanding on companies to go live with. And that was the biggest impact that it had on our business, which we're really excited about what that has done for us.
Yeah, it's interesting how this COVID situation has really made so many of us take a much more granular look at our businesses, at our products or services, and become relevant, right? Like pre-COVID, I think a lot of us had the luxury of having products and services that were consumable by the market by nature, but maybe they weren't super refined, right? And this has really kind of put us all through the refiner's fire, and it's cool that you've been able to emerge on the other side of this with something that you found to be more relevant, easily adoptable. And that's the thing here, that most of these compliance and privacy regulations, they're generally a very intense manual process to assess, figure out where your gaps are, to remediate all that, and then get ready for audits, and and then an ongoing situation, year after year. And to have tools like yours that help, automate the process and simplify it, is of great value to business leaders and technology leaders within businesses. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned GDPR. There's a lot of regulations out there. GDPR being, the European Union regulation, but CCPA for California. There's HIPAA, there's PCI for credit cards, there's SOC and SOX, and NIST and all of this stuff, right? DFARS, we could go on, right? I mean, there's so much. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about these things. Again, we mentioned, why would businesses in North America even care about GDPR, right? Or if you're not, say you're operating here in Utah, why do you care about the CCPA? So maybe fill us in on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. First of all, the thing that I realized the most is that as I've kind of been on this journey in understanding data privacy, is that privacy laws aren't actually new. So companies have been dealing with data privacy since the 1800s, where there was an act called the Right to Privacy Act. And so it's not like it's a super new concept for us here in America. But what has changed is the level of data companies are responsible for today, and the access that companies have to data. And what that has done is that has evolved what privacy looks like since the 1800s into now the 2000, 2021, where companies are now focused on how much data can we capture and store, and how can we use that data. What that caused these countries and even states now here in the United States to start to look at is, how do we protect our consumers? And how do we protect our consumers' data and their rights about their data? And so the GDPR came in and they said, hey, companies, you guys are great, you're doing awesome, but what you need to do is you need to be customer first. And you need to start thinking about the data you have and the responsibility, because that data is not actually yours. It's that individual's data. And so they were the first to really come in and start enforcing these laws and say, if you have data about an individual, they're going to have rights. And those rights are, if they want access to their data, if they want to know what data you're collecting about them, you are now legally obligated to provide that back. If they don't want to be tracked, then you have to comply, and you can't track any information about them on the websites or through emails or these different sources. And then if they want to just simply say, forget about me, I don't want you to have anything about me, as a company, you're now obligated to honor that consumer's rights, because the law says that that data is actually theirs, not yours. And you as a company have to be able to go and comply and delete that data out of all your systems, out of all your third-party vendors, like your marketing and data providers. So it became a really complex issue. And that all really transpired in 2018. And then we saw California jump on, and the laws are very similar and the requirements are very similar. So what we found over the years is that if you can comply to GDPR and their requirements, you're pretty well going to be in line with what most of the states and these local privacy acts are enforcing. California is very similar, with a few little definitions here or there, the way that it's talked about differently. But for the most part, it's created companies to be aware of that customer, their rights, and the data that you have about them. So interesting story about that too. This was back before I had founded RIVN, and kind of one of the things that got me into it was I was working with a major airline company here out of the United States that did a lot of business in Europe, and they had huge marketing budgets over in Europe, where they were spending $20-30 million a year to acquire new customers over in Europe. And when GDPR came out, they were so concerned about the requirements and the potential fines, because GDPR comes out and says that it could be 25 million euros or up to 4% of total take. And that scared this airline so bad that they literally turned off all their marketing activities in Europe. They didn't want to collect data about anybody. They just stopped because they were so scared about not being compliant. And that ultimately was the impact GDPR had. And we're seeing that trickle into the United States as well.
Yeah. I know, when GDPR was announced, it was a hot topic, and we started to see a lot of good sized, local Utah companies reach out to us for guidance and help. And so here's the thing, like, again, coming back around here. So GDPR, European Union, Privacy Act, CCPA, the California, Privacy Act, here we are in Utah, or wherever, our viewers are. So what we're saying, I think, Glenn, is that it doesn't matter if you're based here, but if you are transacting in some shape or form with a resident of another state where there's a Privacy Act, and Utah has its own Privacy Act. It's almost 2 decades old now, and it's it needs some updating, and it's not very stringently enforced, but the time is only it's only time until that kind of comes up to speed with the other states. Virginia having just passed a new Cyber Act that goes into effect 2023. But anyway, so here we are sitting wherever we are, and suddenly there's these these privacy acts or compliance regulations that are coming out of different states and countries, and if we're transacting with citizens of those governing bodies, right?
Yep.
All of a sudden, whether that be in person, whether it be through e-commerce, or you're selling products or services somehow to them, you have to also comply with those regulations. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me actually share my screen real quick. I have just a little something that might be helpful. So let me
perfect.
Share this, and then hopefully this will be. Oh, I should have checked this before. I need to do my preferences. So I won't share my screen. I'll just talk through it. So within the California, we'll just use California as an example. So there are certain things that we have to consider, even if we're a Utah-based company, and this is why every company needs to really stop and evaluate their business practices around data privacy. And there's, I can share with anybody if you want to reach out to me. There's really 8 guiding principles that you should look at as a company to ensure you're compliant. But if you're a Utah-based company, use Utah since we're based in Utah. You're $25 million or greater in annual revenue, or you have 100,000 records of consumers or households, or 50% of your revenue comes from selling or sharing this personal data, you are obligated to honor the CCPA. And what that means is you may only have one customer in California, but if you meet one or all or many of these requirements, if that one customer in California requests their data to be deleted, or if they request access to that data, legally, you are now obligated to honor the CCPA law. And if you don't, California, they have they do it very different than GDPR. The Attorney General is responsible for policing and assessing fines to a lack of compliance. They can come and sue you, and then you would then be charged for negligence of that one individual. That's the requirement levels right now in the United States. Is if you honor these requirements or these areas, and you only have one customer in California, and you don't honor their rights, you are legally in violation of their rights. So that's, to answer your question, it's that sensitive.
Yeah. Very interesting, right? And an ever-evolving landscape here that we're dealing with. So I think you're saying, Glenn, that maybe even 5 years ago or 8 years ago, businesses often had the luxury of, particularly if they weren't very large businesses, had the luxury of kind of turning a blind eye to all of this. But the reality is that the landscape has changed so much that that's no longer something that business leaders can do. Like, being familiar with what data security, privacy, and compliance regulations are applicable to your business is something you have to be aware of as a business leader, and you have to come up with programs or practices, within your business to make sure that you're complying with these. If you're in a regulated industry, let's just say you're in financial services, you have to deal with whatever regulations are applicable to that industry. Plus, in financial services, you're probably dealing with, depending upon where you're at in that sector, but you might be dealing with SEC and FINRA and SOX, and you might be dealing with other data security regulations as well. And so the time has come, for businesses to get serious about these things, and to really implement good practices. So tell us about maybe some of the new developments you're seeing in this industry of privacy and compliance. What's changed over recent years and decades?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back, and I think this fits in great with your question. So you talked about financial services. Let's even say healthcare as an example. So healthcare, you have HIPAA, and companies are really hyper focused, or if they're a healthcare company, around becoming HIPAA compliant, which is right. They need to, right? I mean, one of my former customers is United Healthcare, massive healthcare organization, and everything revolved around HIPAA. And that's great. And then let's say you're a bank or a financial institution or a financial lender, and you have to honor GLBA, which is really specific privacy laws around financial services. So that's great. And that those laws are specific to protecting a certain aspect of consumer data. But what has happened is companies have said, oh, we're HIPAA compliant or we're GLBA compliant. We don't need to worry about CCPA or GDPR. But there's so much more going on outside of compliance and HIPAA and GLBA, because what about your marketing teams? And your marketing teams are spending tens of millions of dollars or even thousands of dollars. It doesn't matter if you're a multi-million-dollar company acquiring new customers, but they are not protected under GLBA or HIPAA. And all your business is trying to do is acquire that information that you're using to collect and acquire new visitors and customers is now under scrutiny of these international privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA. But a lot of companies aren't thinking that through, and they're not getting the proper counsel to understand, well, what do we do with our marketing data? Because if you have somebody come to your website and browse all this information on your website, and they request their data to be deleted, even though they may not be a customer of yours and protected under those laws, you are still required to delete all that marketing data that is sitting within these 20, 30 different marketing vendors that you have. So to answer your question, that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen in how companies need to be thinking about data privacy is, number one, where is your data, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies just simply don't know where it resides. And then limiting the collection of data that doesn't need to be collected. We do this a lot with companies where we have initial conversations with them and they start to realize, oh, wow, I didn't realize we were collecting this information or that. And they have to do internal audits to understand where that data resides, what type of data we're collecting, and are we using that data properly, and is it secured and taken care of. And then understanding the limitations to this data and how it can be used, and putting security safeguards around this information so you don't get data breaches. Met with a child's pretty popular child clothing company that had a big data breach, and the consequence of that data breach, and it came through the web, was that they saw a tremendous increase in lack of consumer trust. And they had a lot of their longtime customers that were using this brand start to request their data to be removed from this company. So it increased more like a heavy burden on this company, way beyond just being compliant with this data breach. And so that's probably the biggest thing that we're starting to see, is that cybersecurity, data security is one thing, and companies are really focused on that. But data privacy is totally different, and it's looking at that, and it's looking at how you're using data, how you're collecting it. Do I need to be collecting it? So it's a whole nother conversation that companies need to be focused on right now.
Yeah, very, very good, and very interesting. So, you've touched on particularly GDPR and CCPA and this concept of deletion of data, or giving the consumer control over what data you can and can't have, what you can do with that data, and ultimately, if they don't want you to have it, But what are some of the other, in the most common regulations out there? What are some of the other obligations that businesses need to be thinking about? What are some of the things that we can help business leaders understand about these, and then what do they need to be implementing into their programs to be responsible stewards of the data?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm more than happy to share any of this information if for those who are listening, if you want some of this information that we're talking about, just email myself or Earl. We're happy to get you a lot more information on this, so that you guys companies can start having a checklist of what they need to be doing. the biggest thing that you're going to see is, so I'll just kind of go through these, what the consumer rights are and what the business obligations are. So the consumer rights and almost all of these laws incorporate all, if not some, or if not all of these consumer rights, which is the first, right of access. And what that means is, consumer, Glen Horsley, I'm here in Utah, and let's say Utah passes a comprehensive bill that says that my rights are protected under state law, and let's say I want access to all the data you have about me as a company. Companies are then obligated to honor those rights and provide all that information in a portable, easy form for me to digest. The other is right of rectification. So let's assume there's maybe some inaccuracies in the data that you might have on me, and I want you to update and correct that. That's part of my consumer rights as an individual, is to request companies to update that information, to correct it. Probably where the biggest challenge is right of deletion, because on average companies have over 91 systems that have customer data in those systems. And so how do you ensure deleting data out of 91 plus systems? If just go look at your marketing technology, go look at your website and look at the marketing vendors on your website collecting visitor browsing behavior when somebody comes to your website. I bet you have over 15 to 20 marketing vendors, from your analytics to your personalization tool to your email marketing service provider. So many different systems collecting data, and you are obligated to delete consumer data out of all those systems. So, and then it goes to, the right to opt out. Maybe I don't want you to collect information on me. And then you as a business are required to honor that. You're required to notify and be transparent with this. You're required to do risk assessments within your organization, making sure that you are not in a position where you are maybe not following through with these laws. So you have to be able to prove that you've done these risk assessments and that you've gone through and done data mapping of all your data and where it sits. So that's a heavy burden on companies. And there's a lot that has to take place in order to really truly be compliant with that. So putting a plan in place, understanding what these consumer rights are and what your business obligations are, is really the first step to being compliant with this.
Yeah, very good. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Glen, but if I understand correctly, RIVN helps solve a significant component of all of this picture, and that is the automation of deletion and a track record of that deletion, so that you have an audit trail that shows that, hey, we were requested by John Smith to delete all of his data or to alter the data, and so your solution helps businesses automate that process and have that audit trail. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And just looking through some of the comments, and I think this is really important to understand, is one of the comments on there is that data deletion isn't a right, and the right to be forgotten are not guaranteed, which is 100% correct. So deletion is not absolute. So company, you need to be aware and paying attention to what data is required to be deleted. So and that's another challenge in and of itself. So are you able to quickly and easily find data that needs to be deleted and removed from your systems? And that's what RIVN is really focused on, which is building an easy integrated solution to find and delete data upon those requests. So that's really our core competency, and there's a lot of other things that we do, and that we're working on downstream, but that's really what our company's been founded on.
Yeah, really, in that mapping process, as you mentioned. I mean, when you really think about it, just think about marketing, but then go beyond the marketing and your finance department and your HR department and operations and who has what data and where do they have it and why, and potentially you're storing data of your consumers, your clientele, and your team members, your staff, in potentially dozens of different places, and really understanding where that's all at is part of the battle here. One of the first steps to understanding what's going on and creating a proper program, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. So here's a question I should have actually asked you earlier, Glenn. Probably more relevant to the earlier phases of this conversation, but the reality is, I think it's very applicable. So tell us a little bit more about what is considered, and really, all of this data that we're talking about, in a general sense, is referred to as PII, or personally identifiable information, or in the healthcare industry, it's protected health information, PHI.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about what those are, what's considered to fall under those categories.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think you hit it right on the head, which is it's a little bit different depending on what you're looking at, right? So, but the easiest way to look at it is the definition at least from the CCPA and CPRA, which is information that identifies, relates to, describes, and is reasonably capable of being associated with, or could reasonably be linked directly or indirectly to a consumer or a household. So if you start to think about what type of information that could be, which is name, email address, maybe loyalty number, maybe it's a passport. So there's a lot of different types of information that could be used for that. It could be a marketing like a marketing vendor that has a specific user ID associated to that individual and their browsing and purchase behavior on the website. So a lot of companies use that data from an analytics perspective. So that information could be considered personal information. So if you just start to think about how the type of data you use or have, and how you're using that data, and can you tie that data back to an individual household, is kind of the layman's term of making that make sense. But there's other things. GDPR has a few different nuances to that than CCPA or CPRA, but virtually they're all the same for the most part.
Yeah, that as you read that, you can totally tell an attorney wrote that. It's a lot of legalese. It's very all-encompassing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As you read it, I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. But the very interesting thing is, oftentimes we think of PII as, well, it's my name, it's my address, it's my phone number, it's my social security number, it's my credit card number, right? But you're saying it goes, far beyond that. It's, the behavioral analytics information that you have about how those people interact with your marketing campaigns and your website, and whatever information you might store about them that could potentially be tied back to them, is potentially PII. So here's that kind of leads into another topic here. There's this trend now of anonymizing data, right? Of stripping what is potentially PII from data. Tell us a little bit more about that, and is that an instrument that can actually help businesses in this process?
Yep. So I would. So this is, again, typically from my experience, is a company preference. I almost always in the depending on the situation, suggest that companies try to anonymize, depending on the type of company you are and how you use data. So maybe you have a big data science team, and that information is used to better understand industry trends, but you have to redact or remove information that can tie that individual back to who I am, or that information back to who I am. So again, every company is a little bit different on how they do this. I talk with companies all the time. Some just simply say, we don't even want to worry about it. We don't want to anonymize. We're just going to delete. But most companies have a process to anonymize. And we 100% agree with that as a company, that if you can, and if it makes reasonably sense, then 100% try to anonymize if you can, because that data can then be used for some really valuable information. One of the things that we like to look at is, let's say you're getting, and it's crazy as this sounds, we have companies that are doing thousands of deletion requests a month. And let's say you want to try to understand why you're getting so many deletion requests a month. So as a data scientist, you can take that data even though it's anonymized, you can take it and try to understand trends and say, who are we getting deletion requests from, and what can we do as a company to maybe build more trust and maybe reduce the number of requests, because data is gold. That's the reality. We don't necessarily want to delete data if we don't have to. And so if you can anonymize it, use that data to better understand trends and analysis, then that would be something we would suggest.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So, and this process of anonymizing data, I think it's a very good strategy for businesses to decrease their exposure, right? And still have the data that they want and need. Let's just say it's behavioral analytics data. Like, you don't need names tied to that stuff. You don't need social security numbers or addresses or phone numbers. Your marketing department, all that data can be stripped out, and simply just have what's applicable to them. The same thing goes for data that's passed to your finance department or your ops department.
Yep.
And you kind of glazed over earlier, but this concept of responsible gathering of data, like gather what you need. In today's world, you don't need to gather more than that. And most people, frankly, including myself, we don't want to give up a whole bunch of information when it's not needed. Like, sometimes you fill out these forms on websites, and honestly, I'll back out of it if privacy is very important to me. I'm in the industry, and I'm a little gun shy anyways about it all, right? And so, if a company's asking too much information or information that's irrelevant, I will back out and I won't transact with that company, right? And so think about, gathering pertinent information. Don't go above and beyond in today's market, because people don't want you to do that, right? And they won't interact with you if that's your practice. And then most definitely, if you don't need the PII that's tied to that data, strip that information, anonymize it, and you can still use the data. It doesn't matter, you won't have a compliance governing body, breathing down your neck, whether that's the AG of California or whatever it is. You won't have them breathing down your neck and trying to issue fines for anonymized data. So it's a really, really effective way for you to maintain that data, study that data, use that data to understand your market, and to to improve and evolve your products and services, right? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely, 100% agree. And the AG has been really clear in saying to companies, if you have not tried, we're going to come after you first. So maybe you are in violation and you didn't have a perfect privacy, all your procedures and documents and everything weren't 100% in order, but the AG's office can see that you made an effort. They're going to be much more lenient on you than somebody who's just said, I'm not going to be affected. This isn't my responsibility. I'm just going to go on as status quo. Those are the ones the AG has been pretty adamant in California, saying we are going to make sure those people are the first to be dealt with. So just start, come up with a plan, figure out a solution, because now, even if you're not 100% compliant, you've at least tried, right? You can show due diligence. You can show that you're doing the right things and taking the right steps. And then you can always fix the minor things as they come up.
Yeah, very good. And you're right. I mean, start somewhere, right? Sometimes implementing really robust privacy and compliance programs, it's a process of 18, 24 plus months, right? But you just have to get the process started. And Glenn and I may not have all the answers for you or all the solutions, to take care of it, but we know enough people in the local and national market to help. We know really good, talented privacy and compliance attorneys that can help with the written documents and policy and procedure and all that kind of stuff. And so, get the process started, start mapping your data, start figuring out where your exposures are at, do a gap assessment, figure out what your requirements are, what your obligations are, and start the process, right? So let's talk a little bit about, we've mentioned some of these, but let's talk in some more depth. What are some of the risks if your business is found to not be compliant with a regulation, an act, a law? What could happen?
Yeah, so we can start by looking at Europe, and I talked about this briefly with GDPR. They have a governing panel, so a union that has taken on the governance of GDPR. So a little bit different, and you go through this process, and you are audited, and if you are found that you aren't in compliance, they can fine you 25 million euros or up to 4% total take, so gross revenue, which is a significant issue, right? So that's scary. But keep in mind with GDPR, and most people, if you're a Utah-based company and you don't do a lot of business over in Europe, it's something really not to be overly concerned or scared about, but just make sure that you're doing what you can. So because they're going to obviously, they have a website you can go to, and there's thousands of pending violations in there, right? So they've kind of got their hands full. California took a different approach, and I think this is really important to understand. The fines are much smaller, so up to $7,500 per violation, but it's managed and governed by the AG's office. So that's important to understand. And there is class action responsibility. So let's say you are a company that hasn't complied, and you have violated, let's say, 2,000 people's rights, and they find a class action attorney and they file a class action lawsuit against your business. That's just as important to your company as the AG's office auditing and marking you. So we've already seen class actions filed in California. And one of the things that we see, and we hear this all the time because of the nature of our business, is there's third-party companies that will send a list of consumer requests to a company saying, hey, I represent these 500 people. You need to delete their data, or they need access to their data. So we're here in the United States, we're seeing that more and more, which is somebody representing hundreds, if not more, consumers, and saying you need to honor these requests across all these individuals. And if not, we're going to open up a class action lawsuit against you, and we're going to hold you. We're going to go to court, and we're going to win this case, and now you're going to be fined for each individual violation you've been had. California, if you lose, the consumer is the one that wins. So if I sued you as a company, I get paid. In Europe, if I get fined, the consumer doesn't get anything. The European Union gets that money. So there's more incentives here in America, obviously, the way that our business is done. And we're going to see more and more lawsuits coming to fruition because of that.
Yeah. So let's dig a little deeper into some of these soft costs, right? That business leaders often don't think about. So you think about, okay, if I were to have an incident, and more often than not, what prompts these audits or investigations into your privacy and compliance practices are a breach, right? It comes to light that your company has been breached, that you've exposed data, and then people start digging around. And business leaders often think about, okay, well, there's federal, state, maybe some regulation fines to deal with, but you're saying beyond that, I potentially have class action lawsuits to deal with. And actually the cost of those class action lawsuits, while the governing body fines can be significant, the class action lawsuits can be far worse, far more costly sometimes. On top of that, and feel free to fill in, Glenn, and anything that I'm missing, but and we are often involved in these scenarios. We're brought into a scenario where a company is breached, and we're intimately familiar with with these costs that begin to rack up for these businesses. So from an IT perspective, you're going to have forensics costs, you're going to have remediation costs, you're going to have to get back up and rolling, right? You're going to have your attorney fees to deal with. Most definitely, you may have some insurance deductibles, and really quick. I mean, sidebar. If you don't have a cyber insurance policy, and a good policy, not just a kind of a lame rider on your primary policy, talk to a very well-versed cyber insurance agent about a proper cyber policy for your business. But you're going to have some deductibles there, to pay for as part of this. A lot of business leaders don't think about the downtime.
Yep.
Cyber incidents today, we're seeing the time to recovery increase significantly, particularly because of the legal requirements of forensics and stuff, and so sometimes a cyber incident, you could get back up and going in a day or two, and sometimes now we're seeing those stretch out into several weeks, and all that downtime and all that lost revenue. We recently helped a local Utah business that was losing several $100,000 per day in revenue due to a cyber incident. And that's not even that huge. Like, we have local businesses here in Utah and beyond, of course, that are, doing millions of dollars in revenue or tens of millions of dollars in revenue every single day. And if you're down, and then you got to think about the market's perception and sentiment around you. You mentioned it really quick, but, generally following these situations, and particularly if it comes to light that you have been negligent, that you haven't really taken, the proper care to protect consumer data, you're going to have people leaving in droves as clientele and requesting you to delete all their information and potentially never transacting with your business again. You're going to lose the market's confidence, right? And all of those costs, begin to add up significantly. There's all sorts of numbers done on different studies and different size of companies, but a recent one, it's a couple years old now, but for the state of Utah, like the standard SMB for a cyber privacy, incident, the average cost of one of those incidents is about $2.5 million.
Yeah.
If you're not prepared for it, it can be, massively disruptive or even a business-ending event. So anything I missed there in terms of some of those soft costs you got to be thinking about?
No, and I think you hit it right on the head too. Is there's all these soft costs, but I think, especially me coming from a marketing background and digital marketing, where it's all about customer acquisition, customer trust, and personalization, and really, as a company, are you willing to take the risk to lose consumer trust and consumer brand reputation? That's a big question you need to ask your organization. So the cost that it costs you today to become ready and to protect yourself are going to be minimal compared to the cost if you do violate, or if you do have a breach, or you do have an incident. Though that's where it gets really demanding and exhausting. A local company here that is a customer of ours, they had a cybersecurity breach I think it was October, and it shut down the entire business to try to solve it. And it was all hands on deck, and it's a fire drill that companies don't necessarily want to have to go through. And so how do you protect yourself from that? And that's, I think you hit it right on the head, Earl. Very
cool. Glen, this has been a really fun conversation. I've really enjoyed, having you on the segment here. Do you have some parting words? Maybe tell us a little bit more about RIVN and how to get a hold of you, if anybody wants more information.
Yeah, I would say, just parting words is really be aware of your situation, be aware as a company, what your goals and responsibilities are. Really take the time to identify what your priorities are, and do you have a plan? Are you doing the little things? Let's say you aren't a $25 million revenue company, or you don't fall under some of these other obligations to where you are held accountable to these state privacy laws here in the United States. Be thinking ahead, right? Because the goal is to eventually get there. And are you doing something today to prepare yourself so that when you are legally obligated to honor the law, are you already prepared? And so that would be my biggest thing, is take the time to put a plan together, look at the processes. Feel free to reach out to me or Earl, and we can provide you kind of some steps to follow, so that you can be prepared for some of these things to take place. If you are interested in connecting with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can even just email me directly. It's just Glen, Glen, @RIVN.com, RIVN.com. Feel free to shoot me an email. I can send you any of this information that I've quoted or talked about today, provide checklists. There's some really good resources out there. The IAPP is another resource I would highly suggest you subscribe to or become a member of. It's the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and they are amazing, and they have great content, great information that you can leverage and take advantage of. So just a few little things there that I would say take the time to be aware of.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And maybe to add to your words of wisdom, and this is based upon experiences that we are seeing day in and day out, play out, in our local market and beyond, because we service, some accounts across the nation. We are seeing a significant amount of businesses run up on new opportunity, have opportunity to engage with large accounts, large businesses, massive contracts. And oftentimes they're startups, they're less than that 25 million a year in revenue.
Yep.
And they are unable to leverage the opportunity because they haven't been proactive about putting any of these measures into place. And so we generally see often smaller businesses, and not just smaller, because we've been called into situations where, with businesses that are doing hundreds of millions a year, who honestly have not been proactive about any of this at all. But particularly we see it in that smaller business type of segment. And I know this, and that is that we are seeing a lot of businesses miss out on really amazing opportunity because they've done nothing to be proactive to this point. So, from one business leader to another, my advice would be start it now. It's a lot easier to get programs in place, to create policies and procedure now, and to scale that with your business down the road, than to get down the road, have massive opportunity, come in front of you, and to lose it, or to have to re-engineer and go back and create all this groundwork. It can be far more difficult when you're a larger company and things are a lot more complex than if you build it when you're smaller and then incrementally scale it along the way. So that would be maybe my final parting words and words of wisdom here. So just a reminder, connect with Glen and I on LinkedIn with our businesses. We're always producing a lot of content that's very helpful and valuable to the community like this. We hope that this has been really valuable for everybody who's attended today. We appreciate you all, being part of this with us. Quick reminder that there's a few new episodes here coming up of Tech Beat over the next couple of months. Adam Sessions, CEO of OneWire, Tanner Bell, CEO of Ragnar, Del Majors, CEO of Grand Trunk, and Greg Woodfield, CEO of VIA Software, will all be joining me over the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for those. But and again, thank you all. Thank you, Glen, so much for joining me today. It's been a very informative hour, very useful for me, and I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope everybody enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you, and enjoy the rest of your week.